Good evening, everyone, on this dark and wet Thursday. I'm Mary Mills. I'm a partner and editor here at Tortoise. I'm delighted to be here, although not in person as usual, but with Nels Abbey, who is a former banker. He's a satirist, writer of this very great and funny book, Think Like a White Man, penned under the satirical name, I should say, of Dr. Boulay Whitelaw. That is his, Dr. Boulay Whitelaw III, I should say. That is his alter ego. He describes the book as a racially spiced non-fiction satirical self-help book. We'll come to more of that in a second, but just I wanted to repeat some of the things in the slides that you will have just seen at the start there, which is to say this isn't just all about me and Nels chatting for an hour. We do want to hear from you as ever. We want you to get involved, and there are two ways of doing that. You can stick your hand up by going to participants and pressing a little box will come up with people's names, a little raise hand box, press raise hand, or chat with my colleague Luke, who is in the chat there and ready to talk to you. There he is, give us a wave. So Nels, as I said, I loved your book, so funny and so smart. And if I can, I'd love to turn to some words right at the end in the acknowledgement section of the book. I always read the acknowledgements. And you say there, I set out on what I considered to be a ridiculously futile mission to write the blackest book possible, and if possible, the blackest book ever. Something so ludicrously and universally black, it would be too alarmingly black for Britain, even Croydon, something you wouldn't expect to read this side of the Rhodesian Bush War. That really made me laugh. It's very characteristic of the book. Just tell us what exactly made you start writing it, and did you think when you started writing it that you'd be able to publish it? Because it sounded like you didn't.
Well, thank you very, very much for having me here tonight. It's a delight to be with you and to be with everyone here on the line. And honour that some people have actually tuned into this, but there we go. But thank you so much. Yeah. So what really made me set out to write it was that I was working at the time. This is when I was still a banker, which I left bank about 5 years ago to go join media, and which I thought was a lucrative idea or so for myself, which turned out to be another bad idea for myself or so. But anyway, I was working in banking at the time, and I'd worked my way up from pretty much from the ground zero right the way to a fairly senior level at a fairly quick rate, at a fast speed, and throughout every single day that I worked there. Every single day in every single organization that I worked in, there was always presenting very, very significant challenges that had a subtle, that subtly had something to do with race. And how you navigate those situations was always very, very difficult and required absolute expertise. It really required you to really know what you're doing, because in a place like such as banking, which is a fairly conservative industry, but it's actually a lot more liberal than, say, media to a large degree or so, whereas liberal is a liberal presenting industry, but it's actually more conservative than, say, banking. But in both industries, complaining or speaking about something bad happened to you, or something happened as far as race is concerned, it was a bad idea. So if I give you my first day on work ever, and I documented in the book, I arrived at work, I was meant to get there at 10. I arrived about an hour and 15 minutes too early, which meant I was just trying to actually make sure I overcame. I beat the stereotypes about black people always arriving late or some nonsense like that. And then two gentlemen, as I stood at reception waiting, two gentlemen approached me, patted themselves down, and showed me their ID cards. And then the lady came after them, showed me her ID card. And then from there, it snowballed. The entire company showed me their identity cards as they arrived for work. And then it became pretty clear, obviously, pretty quickly that they all thought I was a security guard, which when you then realize that when I got to my floor and saw that nearly all 200 of my new colleagues were all white, and they've never had a black colleague before, it became clear, and that was just in my department, but it was mirrored across the entire firm. It became pretty clear that this was a unique situation for both them and myself to a certain degree. And it started to dawn on me at that very moment, almost from day one, that this is weird, this is strange, this shouldn't be happening, but it's happening, and it's kind of funny at the same time too. And maybe I can make some light out of it. Here we are today.
You told that story very funnily in the book as well, and there again, and it just sort of really sort of intake of breath, and I can see some people sort of shaking their heads in shock. But I mean, it really is an extraordinary thing to happen, and your heart must have sunk a bit, because you said really worked really hard to get into this kind of corporate world. And I wonder if we could sort of scroll back a bit to your upbringing, which isn't in the book, but you know, I've sort of subsequently read about. But you had a foster parent, a white foster parent who was a German Jewish foster parent. Is that right? Oh, have we lost Nels, or is it me?
No, don't worry, Merope. Nels will be rejoining on his mobile. Bear with us a second.
Okay, I can tell you what I've read about Nels's foster parent, but I think it's much better coming from him. Hopefully he'll be back in a second. Huge apologies. There he is.
Okay.
I got a bit worried about you there, Nels. Oh no, and again. Have we lost him again?
We have, Merope. We'll just try and get him back.
I'm so sorry. So, well, I will start talking about what Nell said, and hopefully he will come back. And
oh, I can't. Sorry, hold on one second. I can't.
Liz in the chat's telling me to sing a song. You really don't want me to sing a song to fill this in. If there's one thing that would make people get off this call quicker than silence, it would be me singing. But just out of interest, has anyone here read the book already? That would be or is it just me? Because I can highly recommend it. It's very funny and full of good advice. Who's Tessa? Where they go to Tessa? Tessa, are you there? Is Tessa? Tess. Have you read it already? Oh no, now I can't hear you as well. Tessa, can I hear you?
I didn't realise I didn't realise I was allowed to unmute myself. I thought Liv had control over everyone.
You have the power.
No, I love that story from Nels. It really reminded me of the first day when I started at a bank and I was the only female director. And I went up we had this really posh old dining room, and I went up, I was really nervous, and I went upstairs to have lunch in the director's dining room by myself, and I walked in. And as I walked to the table, the vice chairman just passed me his plate to clear because they'd never had a woman in there who wasn't a waitress.
Oh God, that is the same. I mean, you know, it
happened. Yeah, it happened a few times until I said, "I'm really sorry, but I'm not the waitress, or have you just lost the use of your legs?"
Oh, hang on a second. I think Nels is back. Thank you, Tess, for that little anecdote to keep us going. Nels, are you there? Are you there, Nels? Say yes. I can't do this without you.
I can hear you. Yes, I'm so sorry. That was embarrassing there. So there you go. I'm not going to tell you which internet provider I had. But yeah, sorry about that. I didn't hear anything you just said there. My backup device let me down too. So there we go. The heavens are conspiring against us.
I can't believe you didn't hear what I said. It was obviously brilliant. Every word of it. Well, I was asking you about your upbringing, which was with a white foster parent, a Jewish German lady. Would you tell us about that and how that sort of shaped you?
Yeah, so I grew up in, I was born in the 80s. I know I look a little bit older, but yeah, so I was born in the 80s and I was immediately fostered, which was a very common thing for West African immigrant parents to do at the time, to hand their children over to white working class families to raise them in the British countryside. And the purpose of it was so that our parents could actually either study or work, or some of the parents actually, I was lucky this didn't happen to me, but some of the parents actually didn't return to pick up their children and just left them there. And there was many reasons for that. Some of them were quite negative, but my experience was largely due to the fact that my dad wanted to go back to Nigeria and set up his businesses, and my mum wanted to stay in London and continue to work over here. But so I grew up in a place called Benson, which is this small, I would describe it as a village, which frankly no one's ever heard of. I've never met anyone who has ever heard of Benson. And it was a really, really small village. And I went to one of those schools where I was pretty much one of those classic English schools. If you're a black person, you probably know the pictures quite well, in which you see the all-white school. In the school pictures, there'll just be one black dot somewhere in the far left, and that was normally me or my sister or somebody or someone just like us who'd be fostered as we were children. And so I was lucky enough to be fostered by a very, very lovely couple, a Scottish gentleman called Mr. Ernest McIntyre, God rest his soul, and a German Jewish lady called Ingrid McIntyre. And they were they were a lovely couple. And but my foster mum I had a very, very huge bond with, because I think she took a huge liking to me, whereas my foster dad took a liking to my sister. And pretty much a lot of what I know today, as in navigating the latent difficulties of things such as race when you're very, very little in somewhere such as Benson, and we then moved to rugby and Derby, those things were very, very difficult. And to find a parent, for my parent, my foster mum, who was a white German Jewish lady, who in retrospect now, it makes sense that she knew a thing or two about racism. She was able to articulate these things, explain to me with, unfortunately, I didn't really, I wasn't from the Martin Luther, before I even knew what racism was, I was a anti-racist, and I was a violent anti-racist. So if somebody said the wrong thing to me or so, just about mocking my appearance, I didn't know what racism was at the time, and I knew that stung me, or that didn't hit me, it would lead to somebody getting hit or something. I would end up getting suspended from school, and it was just the normal cycle that you go through or so as a young black child, if you're not careful. And but my foster mum broke it down to me and really explained things to me and told me how to really navigate these things and what to expect. And of course, the normal sticks and stones, breaking bones, and words never hurt you. And then you realize as you grow older that words actually break your heart, which is just as important too. So my foster mum was an amazing lady. She raised me until I was about 10 years old. And then my mum, also another strong, amazing lady in her own right. My mother was always in my life, I should point out. Our mum would come and see us every 3 weeks when we were in foster care. And so we'd always see this black woman who'd come along with loads of goodies every 3 weeks or so for us or so. Then that pretty became clear that this black woman is actually a real mum. So then we'd also go and spend summer with our mum in London, which was a culture shock. But my mum didn't let us return to foster care when we were 10 years old. And the last conversation.
Oh no. Hang on. Have we lost him again? He's got so many interesting things to say, let me tell you. It's worth waiting for. I just hope he's going to come back in a second. It's interesting the number of women, not just Tess, but Debbie now, who's saying, you know, she's had similar experiences, because although it's in no way the same being a white woman, there are some similarities. When I read it, some of the self-help aspects to this book about how to deal in a white male-dominated environment, I thought I'm gonna remember those, which is one of the things I really took away from the book, which is I hope we're going to come to those in a second when Nels comes back. I think we should find out who his internet provider is so that none of us use them. That's the basis of intersectional thinking. Exactly. Yeah, the overlocking experiences are great. He's not back yet, is he? What I might do is, if he's not back, I might just turn to some of the slides that I've got, because the book is peppered with do's and don'ts of how to get on and think like a white man. And some of them are true, and some of them are, some of them are meant to be funny, and some of them are true. And I could have picked so many, but I have got a couple of slides of the first. Well, I'll bring up this slide, but I think Nels is back. Nels, are you there? Nels, are you there? There you are.
Yes, I'm here. I'm so sorry. I don't know
what to get with me tonight.
I'm so sorry, which is not my style at all, believe me. But yeah, so I don't know how much of that you heard, but I'm embarrassingly sorry about this. I probably should have. Yeah,
well, I'll tell you what, before we lose you again, I was just going to move on to some of those slides, the do's and don'ts in your book. There are 187 of them. Just before this thinking started, you told me that wasn't a coincidence. Why 187?
Yeah, 187. It's actually it's quite a funny thing. So 187 is a very unusual number to actually pick for do's and don'ts in the book. But the number 187 is actually hip hop. It's actually, if you're in California, for example, it's actually the penal code for murder in California. So if you're actually in California or so, you happen to murder somebody, that would be the charge that you're actually given or so. And as I understand, if you actually dial the number 187, it means that you're calling the police to address a murder situation in California. It's become hip hop slang. So I just thought to myself, why not just write 187 do's and don'ts and just see who gets it? It just went over many people's heads for some bizarre reason, but there we are.
I totally went over mine. I'm so sorry. I wish I'd known. But so I was just telling everyone, there's 187 of them. I could pick so many. I tried to pick some that were funny and that were true. Do we have 2 slides, both of which have sort of 3 on them, I think?
Yep.
Here we are. Why do you read them to us, since they're your words?
Okay, there we go. No pressure.
No pressure.
187 quick do's and don'ts. Number 5, wear cheap non-branded glasses to interviews, even if you don't need them. It softens your image and indicates a vulnerability as opposed to blackness. Plus, no one who ever wore glasses did anything black. And you might be surprised to learn that I'm actually following this rule tonight.
No, you're not.
I am. Yes, this is not made up. I really live by this. These glasses do nothing for me other than soften my image or so
I can't
whatsoever.
believe it. I'm in shock.
But do perfect your diction, i.e. sound as white and polished as possible. This is critical. Sounding remotely like a 21st century Stephen Fetchit will damage your career. I might be following that too also today, who knows. 21, do order salad when at a business meal. Even if you, like most black people, hate the taste. It makes it seem as if you value your health and your life, therefore smashing multiple black stereotypes with one tasteless, leafy plate.
I like that one, and I want to know whether you genuinely do that as well. There's one more slide for the moment. Next slide.
I do everything in here. Well, most things, but there we go.
I lost you for a second.
I'll do this, number 28. Oh, have you lost me? Hello?
No, you're there.
Can you hear me?
Keep going. I thought I had for a moment.
Lucky. Okay. Do seize any opportunity to pay white people the supreme ultimate compliment. You've lost weight, even if they've done the opposite. And number 34, I am so sorry to everybody on the line. That is very embarrassing to read that in public. Number 34.
It's hilarious.
Do place a extremely light-skinned child on your desk. Doesn't matter who they belong to. Allow people to assume that they belong to you. This will hopefully garner sympathy when it's time for budget cuts. It's the photographic equivalent of saying, please don't shoot. There's a white person in my life and we have procreated together. And I cannot tell you how embarrassing and shy it is to say those things out in public. It sounds amazingly funny when you're typing behind it.
Come on, it is honestly. Wait, get rid of the slides. I honestly thought that they were so funny. Also, let me look at you now. Let's go. I want to say something because I want you to take off the glasses and show us the real you. And then I want you to tell me that I've lost.
This is the real me. This is the real deal. So the glasses are just completely cosmetic. So I just know they are. Yeah, but they do make me look. You see, it softens my image because no one who ever wore glasses ever looked. This doesn't look like a threatening person, the slightest bit. But this, however, you probably wouldn't hire this person, particularly I'm not shaving right now. But with the glasses, there we go. So let's keep the glasses on for the rest of the evening.
Liz says, I can't believe they're fake glasses, but now I can't look at you.
No, they're not fake. They're real, but they just do nothing. I really don't need them. Yeah.
My colleague Liz says she's very suspicious of people who order salad at business lunch. Is that, I couldn't work out how much you really lived by these things, because I think some of them really are, and I think we're going to come to some of the genuine ones. I've got another slide to you, but some of them really are authentic, and it's obvious that the glasses, which I thought might not be a real one, are. Like, would you genuinely be at a business lunch and say, I'm going to order the salad, just, you know?
Of course, absolutely. And cheese for dessert too. And I don't get me wrong, I'll go to KFC on the way home, but I'll do it right there and then, because it's just it's actually kind of funny. There's also one too where I said in there about not ordering two mains as a starter in the main in order for it to be cost effective. I did not personally do that, but one of my friends did do that, and he thought it was a good idea at the time. But I just had to explain to him, you look like a bush boy, ordering one pizza and then a steak for a main, or ordering a pizza for a starter and a steak for main, so it's not a wise idea. Then he ballooned a couple of months later on, and I said to him, yeah, there's a reason why you're ordering two mains because it's cost effective or so. To be serious. There we go.
But some of the stuff that's really stayed with me actually was how you handled HR in your corporate life. Because I think that's something that a lot of people have gone through. And actually, the next slide, I'm going to come to that in a second. But a lot of it is about dealing with a complaint to HR, and you are very wryly amusing, I suspect, being authentic about how to deal with that kind of thing, which is you never, ever, you say, this is about race, because the minute you do, you are paving the way for you to be managed out of the company.
Of course.
And the bit that made me laugh was that if the nice HR woman says to you, do you think race may have played a part in this? You say, that's funny. I'd never considered that angle. I mean, this is a sort of survivor's advice for you, isn't it? It's like, this is, it's not what you want to say, but it's what you have to say to survive in corporate life. Is that right?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, absolutely. Because I've worked my way up to a fairly senior level, I know what it looks like when a person has complained about something to do with race. And I know it looks like when that thing goes through the ranks and gets to the very pinnacle, and then bingo, at the executive committee, they're talking about a racism complaint, which is very uncomfortable, because they're gone. Again, till this very day, most executive committees are still all white till this very day. And when you're there, hey, some lowly black person somewhere in the ranks down the line, and then you've complained about racism, it can really get out of control very, very quickly, because this is long pre-George Floyd or so, which triggered a reckoning. It can really get out of hand very, very quickly. And the norm is sign this NDA, take a year's salary, and off you go or so. And then you're hoping that with the NDA signed or so, that you're protected or so. But often sometimes this information spills and things are whispered around town or so. And I've seen it pan out pretty poorly for people who complain about racism. So the norm is, I would often say, look,
don't do it.
It's not a thing to complain about. It's not a wise idea to complain about it. It's just something that sometimes you just have to stomach and keep it moving.
I mean,
sadly,
it's a pretty depressing conclusion but you sort of make lots of jokes about it and say this is how you do, but you also say keep a diary just in case of every aggression, microaggression, etc., etc. And
the most senior black person in the history of the City of London, not in the history of financial services, but that would be a guy called Stan O'Neill in America, but who was the former CEO of a company called Merrill Lynch, a company, ironically, they helped run into the ground and almost destroyed the capitalist system. But the most senior black person in the history of in the City of London in Britain was a quiet, enigmatic man called Tiam Tijani. Very interesting guy. I believe it was Standard Chartered or somebody he was running. He was CEO of it. Then he went on to run a company called Credit Suisse, and he moved to a place called Switzerland, where he was living, I believe it was in Geneva or somewhere. There was a fascinating story about him in the New York Times on Saturday, where they spoke about his experiences as a black person or so in the working in financial services. And he went through hell, and he was the CEO. He went through hell, and he was quietly pushed out. Even after he turned the company's fortunes around, returned it to profitability, did very well as a pillar of absolute dignity and intelligence and wit and wisdom. Quiet guy. This was no Malcolm X style figure or anything else. So this was a very, very professional guy. Everything you could think, almost a prince, and it still wasn't good enough. It was still off you go, and that's pretty much it. So now the stories are starting to emerge to the point where Credit Suisse had to apologize to him for some of the stuff they made him stomach. So, for example, at a party, they brought out a black person I think it was just a person in an afro pretending to be a black person sweeping the floor also as part of the performance. And that was the type of stuff that he had to stomach, but he just walked out of the room. But it's not until now, where he's actually probably in a more comfortable or confident place, that I don't know if he's doing it by himself in the background, but it's happening, that the stories are now coming out, that this was the stuff they had to really stomach. It was not easy for him, despite his bit. And I'm sure with Barack Obama, the most senior of any of us, the best, the furthest any black person has gone since Jesus Christ, he had to stomach a whole heap. He had to kiss a policeman's bottom for saying what was essentially a fact, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so these stories are real. Yeah,
I mean,
these situations are real.
That slide related to that, because I have got a slide that's sort of, this is one of your more serious ones. This is where you say, don't ever complain about racism and do pretend it doesn't exist. Learn to love racism because you'll be spending a lot of time with it, and don't sell yourself. Always know your worth. I mean, this is, and demand it, because no one is ever going to tell you your worth, and no one's going to give it to you voluntarily. I read those out for you.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. But you know, this what I was trying to show really is your sort of genuine advice coupled with your humor, which is what I really loved about the book. But you know, in line with the sort of, you know, HR experience, another story that you told about your in your corporate life was what you call the Subservience Test. Would you just tell us a bit about your experiences of the Subservience Test?
Yeah, so this was, again, all the stories are not based on me. The stories are based on myself and the closest people, to my friends closest to me that went into the professional world, but this was me. So sadly, it was quite a bizarre, again, another bizarre story, bizarre experience. I was, one thing led to another. I'm trying to wonder, I think I mentioned about 2 or 3 of them, or I don't know if I placed them all under subservience, but there was a particular period in which a gentleman, pay review day came along, and somebody tipped me off, my friend had tipped me off about how much money he got as a pay advance, as a pay increase and bonus or so. And I was shocked, because I'd never seen a working class black guy, I never came from that sort of background. I was shocked as to how much money he was getting, and I was agog with excitement that, hey, once they let me inside, they let me know my figures, I might have ride off into the sunset, because I literally felt like a rich man at that time. And when they gave me my figures, they told me that, hey, long story short, and he was a white, of course, straight white man, or actually a working class straight white man. And we were rated in a similar fashion. And I got 15% of what he got, not 15% off, 15% of. So if he got 100, I got 15, not 85. So let's say he got 100 grand, I got 15 grand, which would have been nice in its own right, but that was not the case. And so obviously I couldn't complain. I couldn't say what the situation was when I was in the room, but I could say that, look, I wasn't happy with the outcome. And I did just that, and they said they would look into it. Weeks later on, we're in a working lunch. And when we're in the working lunch, my boss says to me, hey, look, I'm thirsty. Can you fetch me some water? This is the guy I complained about my pay a couple of weeks beforehand. And he just said, okay. He said, can I go and get him some water or get him some drink? And I said to him, no, go get your own drink. What's the matter with you? And then I just laughed it off, and that was that. And he did just that. And then when he sat back down, he said, remember that pay review you wanted or so? Well, you could dream on about that. And I just laughed that off too. I thought it was just banter. And it may well have been banter. And I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. But what happened was that he then called me up. I went on holiday a couple of weeks later on. And when I was on holiday, I was coming back from the United States of America. I went for an amazing road trip on the West Coast, but I had to fly over to Washington, D.C. On my stop back. This was 2008, 2009. So Obama was in 2009. So Obama was in office, and I stood literally outside the White House. And I was a black man in the White House. I shed a bit of a tear or so. I was grateful to God that I saw this in my lifetime. And my phone rang, and it was my boss, and they just made me redundant right there and then, right in front of Obama's White House, as I was there, sulking tears of joy about how great the world is changing, everything else. And then I just thought to myself, why couldn't they make me redundant at the beginning of my holiday? But I thought it was to do with that. But then, some years later on, the same thing happened again, where I was doing some work, and I had to deliver banking sometimes could be very pressurized, where you have to do multiple days' work within a day just to get things done. And it was days, and my boss had pretty much said the whole thing that, yep, we need to get X, Y, Z done. And then all of a sudden, she just tapped me on the shoulder one moment and said to me, can I ask you for a favor? And I said, yeah, sure, well, how can I help you? And she just said to me, can you go get me a cheese and tomato sandwich? And I can't lie to you, this is not, I was not a mess, this is not normal stuff. I wouldn't dream of doing something. It was just out of the question altogether. It was completely inappropriate. And then I remembered what happened the previous time. And then I remembered that, okay, this time around, some years later on, I've got a house, I've got a car to pay for, I've got everything else to pay for, everything else. So who knows, whatever trinkets I've got in the background or so. And it dawned on me, do I say no at this stage, or do I say yes? Because if I said no, also, I'll feel proud, but I could lose everything. So if I say yes, I could actually, I would probably, it would damage me, at least emotionally, it would hurt my pride. So I said yes, and then when and it was kind of like, it was painful seeing the pound coins drop into my hand like a little boy or so. And then as I was walking out the door, she just said, make sure it's got a healthy bits of cheese and tomato inside it. And I walked to the shop and I just felt bloody confused, like, what the hell is this? And then that was it. And I just felt like, okay, these were, and I later on learned, these were just almost like subservience tests. So people just trying to see how far you could do, what they could do or so. Or people just trying to express power over you because they have it. And that's just the way it goes sometimes.
And you compare
story.
You compare it in the book to sort of Clinton and Lewinsky, or even nightclub bouncers who just don't let you in, even though they've let someone in just looking exactly the same as you just before. And, you know, it's another one of those sort of dose of realism stories. But, can I just get into this sort of, it's a thing like a white man thing, and right at the start, you make a distinction between white man with a capital W and a capital M as opposed to white man with lowercase. Would you just explain the difference to everyone as you see it here?
So a white man with a capital W, capital M is a white man with absolute power, and is a white man or a man who is racialized as white, who has absolute power, is a captain of industry, captain of the world and everything else, who just runs the world, but who's almost within that small bracket of men who their word goes. And so when I think of a white man in this regard, I'm thinking of a Tony Blair, a Donald Trump, a George Bush, I would say James Harding, but I love James, so this is actually his his company at the same time too. So I don't want to get anybody fired. But yeah, you know what I mean. So there's a certain class of white men or so who just are. I don't know how they get there, where they apply to become it, so, but somehow or another they find themselves at the pinnacle of society and they stay there. And what they say goes, and they quickly emerge as from very, very young or so. Sometimes it's family connections, sometimes it's just whatever it might be or so, they just find themselves there. Now, a white man who I often have to explain this to, are white men who actually are just normal men, who might have some degree of patriarchal power or so, notional patriarchal power. They're likely to be paid more than you by default, but there's a huge gap between, say, a Tony Blair and Tony who lives down the road or so, who just likes walking his dogs twice a week and manages NatWest or something like that. There's just a huge gulf in difference or so. So white man with a capital W, capital M, essentially runs the world. And that's what we're telling you to think like, a white man who is a ruling class, world-ruling white man, as opposed to the lovely guy down the road or so who just wants to drink his tenants and walk his dogs and call it a day. And so I think that's the vast difference between the two of them over here.
I think we all know exactly what you mean, and I do appreciate you explaining it. Although I would like to read one of the early quotes from the book that I really like, which is where you say, "This book Africaizes white people, which means, except where absolutely necessary, it neither reflects nor cares for the varying complexities, diversity, or differences in white people. No nuance, no care, no fucks given. This book just lobs them all together in one big monolithic group." And I just thought that was very funny, but actually it also made me think of this sort of title that is now the sort of acronym, which we hear a lot now, which is BAME. Do you feel that is unhelpful to Black people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think BAME is immensely unhelpful to many people, but Black people in particular. Also, BAME captures a range of different experiences. So basically, BAME is an acronym meaning non-white people, Black, Asian, minority ethnic, but it just means non-white people. If I give you an example, for every £1 a white employee earns in Britain, this is averages, and averages often distort reality, as BAME also distorts reality too. But for every £1 a white person earns in Britain, a Bangladeshi person earns about 69 pence. A Pakistani person earns about 72 pence. a black person earns about 60 to 75 pence. I know all this because I had to write a presentation. This is Black History Month, guys. So this is when black writers get called out to do work. So and this is all fresh on my mind because I had to do research on this yesterday. But here's what's even funnier is that an Indian person gets paid £1.20 for every £1 a white person gets paid. A Chinese person gets paid £1.32 for every £1 a white person gets paid. So what you're often finding also in these situations is that this is a one-all capture phrase that captures everybody, and they'll then say our BAME. If you say if you work for a large institution, where I work for one which will remain nameless, they said that 10% of our top senior managers are BAME, which equated to about 300 people. It's not until when we drilled down that we realized that only 3 of the 300 BAME senior managers were black. And one of them was a head of diversity, which in my view does not count because heads of diversity have no power, they only have influence. And often prove quite useless with that influence or so. And another one was just in facilities. So in terms of actually the person who actually had power in relation to what the principal operations of the organization, there was only one person who had any seniority there. And that was the problem. Again, that's the problem with BAME. So BAME really distorts a lot of things, and it's amalgamating so many different experiences. And I think the objective normally is to reflect disadvantage also within society. But the problem is that it often hides disadvantage. So I think that just actually listing out the different groups of people will probably serve us all better. But it makes a lot more long-winded a conversation when you have to say Chinese, Indian, black, white working class. So BAME, I could see shorthand, but it doesn't really work, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I thought you would say that. Now, I'm just going to move on a bit to another little quote that I wrote down. Every collective ever to taste greatness and every group of people to rise to power have one thing in common. They are a pack of absolute bastards, but exuding the appearance of compassion. And then you give some examples like Cameron, Sarkozy, Berlusconi, although I wasn't sure he exuded the appearance of compassion. But then you also talk about how Britain itself cloaked itself and marketed itself in a translucent cloth of philanthropy and humanitarianism. Now, obviously, you wrote this before, the big BLM uprising of this summer. How did it feel to watch that movement gain traction after writing all those words?
I think the funny thing about it is that, so within the black community, if you are educated to a certain level, which most of us are, and most of the people I hang around with also are very, very well-educated, and well-written and well-read black people, this is not news to us. So we saw this coming. So often, it's so interesting. I often think that maybe we should run a social experiment in our society that when certain news programs or Question Time are on, for example, we make sure that the audiences are fairly mixed also, or we actually take tokens from different communities and put them in different communities to see how, say, for example, we put a white person in the midst of all black people or black people in the midst of all white people and see how they fare and how their perspectives differ. Because in black society, this was no news. We kind of already knew this. This was not news in the slightest bit. And truth be told, before George Floyd was lynched by Derek Chauvin and everything else that actually happened also, I kind of felt that this sort of moment was on the horizon for some time now, because the level of consciousness had been rising for a very, very long time. Just that it hadn't caught on, it hadn't really been peaked into the mainstream yet in terms of what's actually happening within black communities around the world. But on writing those words and seeing what's happening right now, that, hey, it's gone from paper, it's gone from theory to Colson being tossed into a river or so. That's real. That's where we are right now. That's a reflection of the fact that the education was taking place and people knew the role that we played in the world. So in the old days, say in the 80s or so, in the 90s, it was very easy to just say Britain ended slavery and shut up, and that was it. But in today's day and age, it's a very different conversation with younger people who this information is a lot more easy to provide to them, and they're getting this information very, very at the drop of a hat. They're getting this information and they're acting on that information. So it didn't really surprise me as much as it probably did the rest of society. And then again, too, on the flip side of things too, when Brexit happened, I remember I was at this large, big and beautiful media corporation. We'll call it we'll call it Blacks Be Careful for short, just to put it mildly. So I was at Blacks Be Careful, and we had this big meeting the day the Brexit vote actually happened, and there was a lot of the big executives were there, and they just asked, which way do you think the vote will swing, Remain or Leave? And everybody, barring one person, put their hand up when it said Britain will vote for Remain. The one person who put their hand up in the other way was myself. And for some stupid reason, people seem to think that that meant that I was voting for Leave, when in reality, I was just telling you how I felt. I'm not going to tell you which way I voted. It's not hard to guess. But maybe I'm just throwing stereotypes around myself. But at that very particular moment, it became clear that in my mind, I thought I recognized something that they just didn't recognize within that room as much as they probably should have at that time or so. That the country is a lot bigger than London, than the bubbles that we might be in or so. And also too, I had a feeling that certain things were happening. And in addition to that too, I was lucky enough to go around the European, to spend time in Brussels or so and get shown around how things go. And I told them that certain things need to change here anyway, but we are where we are.
I thank you for that. And look, the second half of your book is you know, you do this very good analysis in the first half of the book, and the second half is what you call how to overthrow the white man. And it is again funny, quite cynical, I would say. Probably true though. I'll give people some examples. It's not what you do, it's who you do it in front of. Don't waste time on hard work. He who sweats most gets paid least. Focus on the stuff that gets you noticed. After years in the corporate world, are you quite a cynical person now?
Do you know what? I'm cynical when I'm paid to be cynical, but I actually think I'm very, very, I'm still very, very professional, but I would say, I think experience breeds cynicism. I think would probably be the answer to that. Anybody who's been around or so and had doors smashed in their face and hopes and dreams actually dashed and everything else, so you're going to become cynical as you grow older, as you grow more experienced. But at the same time, I still think I'm still quite a model professional. Oh, you're losing me.
Wait, you're back again. I'm just don't know whether it's me or you. Oh no, I think it might be me this time.
I can hear you.
Keep talking, Nels, because I could hear you.
I can hear you clearly. Yeah.
Apologies for this thing. Sorry to interrupt you. I should mention another pro tip that you said, which is you should have two mentors, one white and one black. And you told a really good story. I think this is from you. Was it Winston Russell who was your black mentor, about your haircut? Will you just tell us that story?
Yeah, so it's so funny. So Winston Russell was this, who in the book is Jamaican, but in real life was actually Asian. It was actually an Asian Cockney man. It was actually a Cockney Asian man, done very, very well for himself. But he wanted to make sure he's very, very well. For last time I saw him, so I know he would want to make sure he's very well disguised. But so the key thing about Winston Russell in this situation is that he is speaking to me, which again was a conversation. That verbatim conversation was with another person as opposed to my actual mentor. But that's all just by the by, real life. But the key thing was this: that he asked about, hey, so getting your hair cut or having your line up, this part of your hair, having your shape up on your hair is very, very sacred to black men in particular. Because I've let mine grow out because I can't see my barber, so I only stick to one barber. But he asked me that, hey, if I'm going to get my hair cut, so why don't I pop into Tony and Guy, and go get my hair cut over there? Which is an absurd statement to any black person, any black man or so, that no, I can't. It would take a very confused black man to go to Tony and Guy and get their hair cut, or a very wealthy one. And I just suggested to him that, look, it's an absurd statement that they'll put foil in my hair and all sorts of other bits and bobs, which never happens to us. And he said, but you wouldn't trust a white barber shop or white hairdresser with your hair, but you trust a white institution that's clearly been letting you down time and time again. And you know it's going to keep letting you down, but you trust them with your life and your career and your prosperity and everything else. And it's kind of like that moment where something slaps you around the face that you're doing things a bit wrong.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that was that.
That's why you always need a black mentor.
Yeah.
So we should have another slide, which is just pilfered from your book again. This slide 4 should be types of black people in the corporate world. This is one of your appendixes. Would you talk us through some of these types that you have identified?
Oh, this is brutal.
It is quite brutal, yeah.
It's just brutal. So there we go. So let's start with the Undercover Brother. And I'll give you examples of who these people actually are. So the Undercover Brother is a ruthless operator who just does not care who he stamps on, which black person he tramples on, and how they actually feel, or so, or anything else, in order to get to where he or she is going to. And I mean, when I say ruthless, I mean unbelievably ruthless. So my next book's actually about an undercover brother, if I can get my agent to agree to let me do it or so, because she thinks it's a bonkers idea, which means it's probably a good one. So an undercover brother, an example of an undercover brother would be a gentleman called Kwasi Kwarteng, when the Windrush actual scandal happened, and he allowed himself to be rolled out and become the government's face of this is not a racist incident, for example, which was sacredly offensive to many black people. White chocolate is principally a white person who happens to be black on the inside or so just happens to live a black life or so, but they happen to have white skin. The white person trapped in black skin is the white person who's white chocolate in reverse. Johnny Just Come is a black person who just arrived from Africa or the Caribbean and is likely to be the relative of a very, very powerful politician. Because if you're a black person who just arrived in the UK or in America, from Africa or the Caribbean, and you found yourself in a choice role in the professional world, it means that you're a highly connected person. So take, for example, Tiam Tijani, who we just mentioned or so, who is practically a prince in his old country. And so therefore, and his parents were largely connected into the government or so. So of course he'll find his way into the corporate world in the West, and he'll work his way up and he does very well for himself. In the middle, we have the balanced black professional, which is pretty much the average black person. The average black person also normal, cool, also likely to just end up somewhere in the middle or so. The streets in the suit on the far left, as you can see, they're closer to jail than they are to actually, somewhere between jail and riches is where they are. The streets in the suit is pretty much that street person who managed to find their way into the professional world, which is actually quite hilarious when you actually see it in real life. And then down at the bottom of there is something called the office revolutionary. The office revolutionary hovers somewhere between benefits and jail. Benefits and jail, I say that's probably the hover between. And the problem with the office revolution is that that's a very good person who wants to change the world, who wants to make things better, who believes that a new world is possible. And they just don't work out. It doesn't work out for them in the professional world, in my experience. I'm happy to be proven wrong, because the norm is, sadly, I think I relate to all these people to a certain degree, but the office revolutionary is quite a sad sight to see in the end, because it's somebody who really believes to do the right thing, but it just doesn't work out for them. Not in the professional world.
Did I miss it? Did you say the shook one?
The shook one. The shook one is it's actually a bit of a tragic sight. I don't know why the whole thing's so close to the CEO, but the shook one is actually a black person who's actually quite scared of. He's actually quite scared and quite meek and quite quiet in the actual professional world. Sometimes, now the reason why I just points out, sometimes they could actually do quite well for themselves because and I don't know if it's introversion also. I don't think it is introversion. I think it's actually just fear sometimes. Whereas, because look, tackling things head on, like racism and type of crazy subjects, the subjects I'm crazy enough to talk about, are difficult. It's scary. It's uncomfortable. And somebody such as that will probably find it easier to just keep quiet and keep their head low. And then, keep quiet, keep their head low. And normally nothing becomes of them. They just quietly get pushed out of the business sooner or later.
My colleague Liz has written an interesting question in the chat. I'd love her to ask you directly. Liz, what you just wrote about Nels writing the book.
Unmute. Hi, Nels. I've loved it.
Hi, Liz.
Honestly, I've guffawed with laughter here in the lonely office. Thanks so much. I just wondered how, I imagine writing this book, it might have felt quite cathartic, but it's very funny, but it's also really bleak. And I just wonder how it felt to be writing it all down. And I really enjoyed your reaction when you see it on the slide. You're like, oh my god, this is so brutal. It's just, I don't know, because I wasn't sure how I felt after I'd finished reading it. Do you know, it was a sort of
I think it's a good point. How did I feel after I finished reading it? After I finished, was how did to some degree. So as I think I maybe that was somewhere I pointed out. So I often, when I experience trauma, I tend to run to humour to get over it, and sometimes that's got me into a lot of trouble. So when one of my aunts died and my cousins came over and they were completely traumatized, and I was traumatized too, I started to joke in order to get over it, and my cousins really cannot forgive me for that until this very day. Even though we all love each other and they know that's what I'm about, but they thought that at that very moment that would be something a bit more appropriate, and it wasn't. It didn't work out like that. But so for me, I always run towards humor in order to overcome trauma, and also I run towards humor which is what the purpose of satire is, to expose folly and vice and hypocrisy and so on and so forth, and human wrongdoing. So I found it a bit therapeutic when I was writing it. I can't lie, it was really something that was just helping me to laugh it all off. So if I go for a rough day or so, I'll go home and just write some jokes about it, and I found it to be quite good. But when it hit the shelf, and I saw it then in real life, that is your name, Nels Abbey, that is on your birth certificate. And also too, that's going to be there. Your daughter's going to have to actually probably speak about this book one day or so. She's already doing it at school in certain degrees. So it became real because it dawned on you, look, this is Britain. Britain is not, we're not a society that likes to talk about race much at all. This is pre-George Floyd. And let alone talk about race in a very, very fast-paced, unapologetically funny, unapologetically bold way. So yeah, but we are where we are.
Do you think any white men have read it and had pause?
Yes, I do. I've had situations. The funny thing is that there's one time I'm going to give a big speech on this in a couple of days. Within days of it coming out, I went to the British Library, Euston. And then I was in there and I said to the gentleman at the actual shop, in the British Library, it says you go in on the right-hand side. And I asked him, because when you're first time writer, you do stupid stuff like going all the way around the West End, trying to sign your book everywhere, hoping you become a big shot. And I went into the British Library and asked the gentleman at the bookshop if they have a book called Think Like a White Man. And this guy looked at me with disgust in his eyes and just said, "Good God, no, we would never stock a book like that." And then, he didn't know I was the author, of course, but nevertheless, it cut me deep. And then I walked out there and went on the long walk and just started walking towards, walking just as far down as possible. And then I got to the Welcome Trust. I thought, so let's just pop into Welcome Trust and have a nice cup of hot chocolate so to get over that shocking instance over there. And in the Welcome Trust, they actually sell books. And there was a gentleman there, a white man actually, reading the book and laughing to himself. And he walked away with 2 copies. And I think to me right there and then, my job, I felt that I'd done my job. That people, if you can get it, it's an important, if you can write to a way that people can connect with it, even when it's something that sometimes they might be the butt of the joke. I think that's an important thing. So white men who have a great sense of humor, like all the white men on the line right now, I would actually say, they've picked it up, they've enjoyed it, they've got back to me. So yeah.
I'm going to come to Yasmin in a minute, but if I would, I'd like to call you out on something just because all those types of people in the corporate world, I couldn't help but seeing on Twitter recently, you wrote, "You'll notice Rishi Sunak doesn't do pandering to or enabling racism that is signature of many an ethnic minority in the Tory party, especially Priti and Sajid." Is that your way of saying, I'm all for Rishi for PM?
No, I'm not actually. I'm not saying Rishi. Don't get me wrong. Well, look, the cabal of former bankers are infiltrating the world or so. Rishi Sunak being the foremost or so, being the foremost or so, me being somewhere in the mix or so, somewhere else. Ethnic minority former bankers I'm speaking of right now is a warming thing. So I'm always happy when I see one of us, our small little tribe of underprivileged former bankers. But don't get me wrong, me and Rishi were not the same thing. He went into banking, as I understand, he made hundreds of millions. I went into banking, I made hundreds of pounds. So so there's a slight difference between 2 of us. But yeah, I do think that Rishi Sunak is actually is a good reflection on the Conservative Party. It's similar to what Kwasi Kwarteng was before, prior to him getting into all the race stuff with Windrush and that sort of stuff. But I do hold the gentleman in very high esteem. but he's making some mistakes. Now telling writers and artists or so to go and find new jobs is not good news for me. Or so the last thing I need to do is to go back into banking. That would not be good for my soul, particularly with a book like Think Like a White Man under my belt.
Yasmin, can I come to you, because you've been saying some interesting things in the chat?
Oh, Yasmin.
Hey, Nels. How you doing?
Hey, how are you?
Just out here, swimming in the capacity.
I hear that. She's worse than me. But there we go. Yep.
I know. I mean, I gave up trying to appease people when I realized that it was never going to work.
But, you were talking, Yasmin, about the strength of identity groups, and how you think you should call people out when you see them sort of misbehaving in the corporate world. Is that right?
Oh, I think it was more somebody in the chat was kind of talking about why we shouldn't kind of lump all white men together or something to that effect, or that there is nothing that sort of brings white men together, and so putting them under one umbrella was a dangerous idea. And I just thought, like, I think typically, certainly in countries that have been colonial or imperial powers, there's this urge for people to see themselves as individuals rather than as members of groups. That really doesn't apply to lots of other people. And also there's no sense of, like, if I see another Black person being wayward and I'm a friend of theirs, I'm going to have a word with them. Similarly, like as a Muslim person or as a Black woman, if I'm writing stuff or doing stuff that people think is politically problematic, I want my people to say, hey, that's kind of not cool, you shouldn't be doing that. Because what's the point of having people around you if they're not going to help you be a decent version of yourself? So I think, yeah, I also think somebody put in the chat, like, oh, white men sort of feel like they're being told that they should be ashamed of who they are and all this sort of thing, and isn't that going to make them feel XYZ? I mean, to be honest, my gut response to that is, like, why isn't my responsibility to coddle other people so they don't misbehave? We act that way around children. We don't act that way around people who are grown. Like, if you feel like an environment makes you feel a particular way, is that my responsibility, or is that your responsibility to fix it, especially if you're in a position of power? And I think you might have caught me at a particular moment in time where I just have very little patience, but I have had to, you can make that same argument about ISIS fighters, right? Like, they've been dealt with a certain way, and so that this is their response, and shouldn't we just, like, adjust ourselves so that they don't get so angry? Like, why should we treat white men differently?
Okay, thanks.
It's really annoying.
So Yasmin, so I estimate that Yasmin is a writer like myself, and I suspect she just got her editorial notes back or so. She's clearly not in the mood. She's not in the mood for playing or diddle-dallying around right now. but I see. Doing it is one of my favorite comedians is a gentleman called Paul Mooney. Is a brilliant. Sorry, first of all, I'll address that about lumping all white. Of course, lumping all white men together. I do it facetiously for humor purposes. White men are as diverse as the rest of us, or so. And most white men I know also actually abhor some of the stuff that's actually done in their name, which is not even in their name. I don't think it actually works like that nowadays or so. This is no longer the time of Kipling. But it does. But yeah. So I don't think we're lumping everybody together. Even in Think Like a White Man, we make some degree of difference. But I do find that what I mentioned earlier on about senses of humor, I think that's a really important thing, because even when we wrote the book to begin with, and I should point out that in this Think Like a White Man, I'm the only Black person who had anything to do with it. Absolutely everybody else in the actual line of production were white women, other than the boss of the publisher, who was a white man. So this is a book by me and a group of white women or so, and I think this is our revenge manual. But what was funny about it was that one of my favorite comedians is a gentleman called Paul Mooney, who was Richard Pryor's best friend, and he's a brilliant, probably one of the most brilliant comedians you can ever listen to, and particularly on the subject of race. And one of the things he pointed out is that it is very, very easy to make to make white audiences in particularly white men, to make them laugh, it's a very, very easy thing to do. That you can joke about anything and they'll be the loveliest audience in the world. They'll laugh at absolutely anything but themselves. And sometimes laughing at themselves is the most human thing to do. Where you can laugh at yourself is the most important of human, is not the most important, but one of the most important of human functions. Where you can actually just see humor in your own actions and your own wrongdoing, or in the wrongdoing or actions of people who are aligned or mirrored to you, or doing things that will benefit you. If you can see humor in it, then you can recognize that maybe there's some wrongdoing that we need to rectify.
Thank you, Nels. Just as it's gone 7:30, and I just want to put up the very last slide, which is your 187th the last do or don't, because I feel like it's a good uplifting one to end on. It's going to neatly on your screen now, right now, or maybe it's not. Is it there? No? If it's not, I'm going to try and find it very quickly before we've got time. It is. Hang on. Should have had it handy.
I've got it. I can read it for you. It's
okay,
page 147.
I can find it. 147.
147, yeah.
There it is. 187. Do always remember that at the end of the day, there is nothing wrong with you. You are trying to navigate a social order and a stigma that predated you and will continue after you. In a normal and just world, you wouldn't have to go through any of this shit. And I just thought it was a great sort of end. I just want to say thank you again and congratulations again on a really brilliant book. It is very funny, guys, and it is.
Thank you.
I learned a lot, and I know you will too if you read it. And thank you, Nels, for taking the time to talk to us. I know everyone's really appreciated it. So good luck with the rest of it. It's been lovely to talk to you. As ever, we can't clap, so we will weirdly wave each other out. And hope to see you again at another Thinking soon.